At just 14, Amina found herself thrust into a world she was not prepared for. A world of diapers, midnight feedings, and the overwhelming responsibility of being a mother. What should have been a carefree time filled with friends, school, and dreams of the future suddenly turned into a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. She felt alone, confused, and scared. Yet her family appeared to rally around her with unconditional support. Her mother was by her side constantly, guiding her through the emotional roller coaster of young motherhood. And her father, though initially shocked, promised to help however he could. Everything seemed difficult, but manageable. Yet, behind the scenes, something was terribly wrong. As Amina navigated the challenges of motherhood, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her parents, once open and talkative, now whispered behind closed doors. Family gatherings grew tense, with certain relatives casting strange, knowing glances her way. It wasn't long before she noticed that every time she asked about her pregnancy, how it happened, why it happened, and what her future would look like, the conversation would be quickly shut down or redirected. Her family seemed too eager to gloss over the details, to avoid the painful questions. It was as if they knew something that she didn't. The unsettling atmosphere in her home began to weigh on Amina's mind. Was her family hiding something from her? The more she thought about it, the more anxious she became. Every cryptic look from her mother, every hushed conversation late at night, every time her father's face turned pale when certain topics were mentioned, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. There was a secret, and it involved her. As the pieces of the puzzle slowly started coming together, Amina couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about an unplanned pregnancy. It was something far darker. Something her family had been keeping hidden for years. Something that threatened to tear apart the fragile trust she had in the people she loved most. What could be so devastating that her own family, those she relied on the most, felt they had no choice but to keep it from her? This was only the beginning. Amina's childhood seemed, at first glance, like any other. Growing up in a small, tight-knit village, she was surrounded by the warmth of family and the simplicity of rural life. Her parents, respected members of the community, worked hard to provide a stable home. Her father, a proud man who ran a small business, was known for his firm but fair attitude. Her mother, soft-spoken and nurturing, dedicated her life to raising Amina and her two younger siblings. The days were filled with family meals, laughter, and neighborhood children playing in the streets until dusk. Amina adored her family. She shared a close bond with her mother, and her father's occasional sternness was always softened by his protective love for her. At family gatherings, aunts, uncles, and cousins would often remark how Amina's family was the picture of perfection, a shining example of unity and love. To everyone looking from the outside, they seemed ideal, solid, supportive, and unshakable. But even in those early years, there were subtle signs that not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Sometimes, Amina would catch her parents in whispered conversations late at night. They spoke in hushed voices, arguing about something she could never quite understand. When she asked her mother about it, she'd brush it off with a gentle smile and say, "Just adult things, nothing for you to worry about." Amina accepted this, thinking nothing more of it. After all, what child questions the words of their parents? There were also odd moments at family gatherings. Certain relatives, especially her father's side of the family, seemed to act strangely around her. She noticed how her aunt would glance at her from across the room, her expression unreadable, while her uncle would occasionally slip into awkward silences whenever Amina was around. She'd hear murmurs from the adults when they thought she wasn't listening, fragments of conversations about mistakes and family obligations. At the time, she dismissed these moments as meaningless adult talk, far removed from her carefree world of childhood games and schoolwork. But the signs didn't stop there. Her father, once a man of many words, grew quieter as Amina approached adolescence. He would look at her with a mixture of pride and something else, something that looked suspiciously like guilt. On her 13th birthday, Amina noticed a change in his behavior. He became more distant, often retreating into his office after dinner, leaving her with questions he never seemed willing to answer. When she asked her mother about his sudden withdrawal, she would always provide the same rehearsed response. "He's just tired from work, dear. Nothing to worry about." But there was something to worry about. As Amina entered her teenage years, the air in her house grew thicker, with unspoken words and quiet tension. Family members who once greeted her with open arms now seemed hesitant, offering awkward smiles instead of warm embraces. The house that had always been her sanctuary suddenly felt heavy with secrets. Despite this, Amina pushed these unsettling feelings to the back of her mind. She was young, full of life, and focused on the ordinary concerns of adolescence: school, friendships, and dreaming about the future. Little did she know, those whispers and strange behaviors weren't random. They were the early cracks in a facade that had been carefully maintained by her family for years. Behind the smiles and reassurances, something was brewing. Something dark and hidden just beneath the surface, waiting to erupt. For Amina, her childhood was filled with love and happiness, but it was also surrounded by an invisible wall of secrets. And while she didn't see it then, the clues were always there, buried in the awkward glances, the hushed conversations, and the growing distance between her and her family. As she would later discover, those early years were not as innocent as they appeared. The family she thought she knew was hiding a truth so devastating, it would change her life forever. At just 14, Amina's life was thrown into chaos. What should have been a time for teenage dreams and carefree days was abruptly shattered when she discovered she was pregnant. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, sending her emotions spiraling from disbelief to fear and guilt. Her mind raced. How could this have happened? She wasn't ready for motherhood. Not now. Not at 14. The day she took the pregnancy test was one she would never forget. The two faint lines appeared before her eyes, confirming her worst fear. Amina felt her world collapse. She was too young, too inexperienced, and her future, everything she had dreamed of, seemed to vanish in that single moment. Panic gripped her heart as she sat alone in her bedroom, trying to grasp the enormity of what this meant for her. Her first instinct was to hide it, to pretend it wasn't real. But how could she? The changes in her body were undeniable. She knew she had to tell her parents, but the thought of their reaction terrified her. Would they be angry? Would they kick her out? These questions tormented her for days as she tried to gather the courage to confess the truth. When she finally broke down and told her mother, the room fell silent. Amina braced herself for the worst, expecting a storm of rage or disappointment. Instead, her mother's face froze, a mixture of shock and pain crossing her features. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply nodded and held Amina's hand tightly, her grip trembling ever so slightly. "I'll take care of you," her mother said quietly, her voice steady but her eyes revealing a deeper emotion. It was the calm before the storm, and Amina could sense that something was off. Her father's reaction was no different. While visibly shaken, he didn't explode in anger like Amina had imagined. Instead, he retreated into silence, avoiding eye contact and muttering something about the family needing to stick together. The response was eerily subdued. Overnight, Amina's world changed. Her friends at school quickly found out, and the rumors spread like wildfire. She could feel the judgment in their eyes, the whispers behind her back. Teachers treated her differently, some with pity, others with quiet disapproval. The isolation was suffocating, and she felt like a stranger in her own skin. At home, her family's support seemed genuine on the surface. Her mother accompanied her to doctor's appointments, helped her navigate the overwhelming process of preparing for a baby, and assured her everything would be okay. Her father made arrangements to ensure she could stay in school and balance motherhood. On the outside, it looked as if they were stepping up to help Amina through this difficult time. But Amina couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. Her mother's once open and warm demeanor had turned cold and mechanical. She was doing everything by the book, attending to Amina's needs, preparing for the baby. But it felt hollow, as if she were simply going through the motions. Every time Amina tried to talk about her fears or ask deeper questions, her mother would quickly change the subject or give vague, empty reassurances. It was as if she didn't want to dig too deeply into how Amina had ended up in this situation. Her father, too, became distant, retreating further into his work, and avoiding any real conversations with Amina. He rarely asked how she was feeling or showed concern about her emotional state. When family members came to visit, there was an awkwardness that hadn't been there before. Relatives who had once been warm and affectionate now offered stiff smiles, awkward small talk, and quick exits. It was as if the whole family was treading on eggshells, pretending everything was fine, while something deeper simmered beneath the surface. Amina began to notice the strange behavior more and more. The way her mother would avoid direct eye contact whenever the subject of the pregnancy came up. The tense, whispered conversations between her parents that would abruptly stop when she walked into the room. The nervous glances exchanged between her father and her older relatives during family gatherings. Something wasn't adding up. Her family seemed to be helping her on the surface, but there was a strange undercurrent of secrecy, as though they were hiding something from her. Amina couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the pregnancy itself. There was something darker lurking behind their forced smiles and supportive words. Every time she tried to probe deeper, she was met with vague answers and hurried reassurances that everything would be fine. But deep down, Amina knew that wasn't true. Something was being kept from her. Something that would explain why her family's reactions seemed so oddly controlled and detached. As her pregnancy progressed, the tension grew, but no one dared to say what they were all thinking. And then, one evening, while her parents thought she was asleep, Amina overheard a conversation that would change everything. She stood quietly outside the door, listening to the strained voices of her parents. Her mother's words cut through the silence like a knife. "We have to tell her the truth. She deserves to know." Her father's response sent chills down Amina's spine. "Not yet. If she finds out now, it'll destroy everything." In that moment, Amina realized the truth was far more complicated than she ever imagined. What were they hiding? What could possibly be so devastating that they were willing to keep it from her, even as her life was turned upside down? Amina's pregnancy was no longer just an accident. It was the key to unraveling a dark family secret, one that would soon turn her world upside down. As Amina adjusted to the overwhelming demands of young motherhood, a different kind of weight began to settle on her shoulders, one not related to sleepless nights or the challenges of caring for a newborn. It was the growing sense that something was being hidden from her. The odd, detached behavior of her parents after her pregnancy announcement had only intensified, but now there was something more unsettling at play. Quiet whispers, fragmented conversations, and strange looks from her relatives added to her unease. It began subtly, during family gatherings, where once warm exchanges were now laced with tension. She would catch her older aunts and uncles eyeing her with expressions she couldn't quite interpret. Pity, maybe, or perhaps guilt. At first, Amina thought it was simply because she had become a young mother, the subject of quiet judgment within the family. But as time passed, she realized it was something deeper, something they weren't saying out loud. One afternoon, during a family barbecue, Amina overheard two of her cousins talking in hushed voices in the next room. They spoke of what happened before and how it's all repeating again. When she walked in, the conversation abruptly stopped. They exchanged nervous glances, trying to play off the awkward silence with forced smiles, but Amina had already heard enough. The tension in the air was palpable, and it left her with more questions than answers. What had they meant by repeating again? What was it that had happened before? Amina's curiosity grew, but every attempt to dig deeper was met with vague responses. When she brought it up to her mother, the response was swift and sharp. "It's nothing, Amina. Stop digging into things that don't concern you. Focus on your baby." The sudden edge in her mother's voice caught her off guard. It was as though her mother was protecting something buried in the past. The more she pressed, the more elusive her family became. Her father remained distant, retreating into his work and avoiding any serious conversation. The few times she tried to bring up what she had overheard, he quickly dismissed her concerns, telling her not to stir up old problems. But the whispers wouldn't stop. One night, during another family event, Amina overheard her aunt whispering to her mother, "She's going to find out eventually. You can't keep this hidden forever." Her mother's face went pale, And without noticing Amina nearby, she simply muttered, "Not yet, not now." The sense of something being concealed gnawed at Amina. It felt like the walls of her life were closing in, every interaction with her family laced with suspicion. The unease grew when an old family friend visited one day. As he greeted Amina warmly, his smile faltered, and he gave her a long, searching look. Before he left, he exchanged words with her mother in the corner of the room, and although Amina couldn't hear everything, one phrase stood out: "She deserves to know the truth." It wasn't long before the rumors started to trickle in from outside the family as well. The small community where they lived was always buzzing with gossip, and Amina began to pick up on whispers about her family's past. A casual conversation with a neighbor revealed a scandal that had happened years before she was born, something involving her father's side of the family. The details were vague, but the neighbor seemed surprised that Amina didn't know. "I thought your mother would have told you by now," she said, her tone filled with pity. Amina's heart raced. What scandal? Why hadn't her parents told her? And what did it have to do with her? As the pieces of the puzzle started to come together, she realized that whatever had happened in the past wasn't just family gossip. It was directly connected to her. The strange looks from her relatives, the evasive responses from her parents, and the fragmented conversations suddenly made sense. They were all protecting something, and it had everything to do with her sudden pregnancy. Amina's mind raced with possibilities. Had there been another teenage pregnancy in the family? Was there a secret child or affair that no one spoke about? And why were her parents so desperate to keep her from knowing the truth? Her anxiety grew, and every interaction with her family felt like a test. Watching for signs, trying to catch them in a lie. The weight of the unspoken truth pressed down on her, making her feel like a stranger in her own home. What could be so devastating that her family felt the need to keep it hidden, even as her own life spiraled into chaos? As whispers of the old scandal grew louder, Amina's determination to uncover the truth grew stronger. She could no longer sit by and pretend that everything was fine. The secret had already begun to unravel, and Amina knew that once she discovered what her family had been hiding, her life would never be the same. The truth was closer than she realized, and soon, the carefully constructed walls her family had built around their past would come crashing down. But would Amina be ready to face the reality of the secret that had been kept from her all these years? One evening, while putting her baby to sleep, Amina's mind swirled with the persistent questions that had haunted her for weeks. She couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were right in front of her, just out of reach. She had tried confronting her parents about the whispers she'd overheard, but each time they dodged her questions, dismissing her concerns with the same hollow reassurances. The tension in the house had become unbearable, and Amina's frustration grew with every passing day. But the truth was closer than she could have imagined. One afternoon, as she was tidying up an old storage room in the attic, a place where her parents stored all sorts of family relics and forgotten belongings, Amina came across a dusty, worn box hidden under a pile of blankets. The box wasn't marked, and judging by its condition, it hadn't been touched in years. Intrigued and driven by the desperate need for answers, she carefully opened it. Inside, she found a collection of old letters, yellowed with age, and several official-looking documents. The handwriting on the letters was familiar, her mother's, but what caught her attention were the dates. They were from nearly 15 years ago, around the time of Amina's birth. Curiosity piqued, she began to read, and as she did, a wave of shock crashed over her. The letters revealed a devastating secret, one her parents had hidden from her all her life. Her pregnancy wasn't just a coincidence or an accident. It was tied to a family scandal that stretched back years, involving lies, betrayal, and manipulation. The more Amina read, the clearer the horrifying picture became. The letters detailed an affair her father had had when Amina's mother was pregnant with her. Her father, it seemed, had been involved with another woman, someone close to the family. The woman had fallen pregnant at the same time as Amina's mother. To avoid disgrace, the two families had made a pact. They covered up the affair, hiding the existence of the other child. But the repercussions of this secret had haunted the family ever since. But the shock didn't stop there. One letter in particular caught Amina's eye. It was written by her mother, addressed to a relative she barely remembered. In it, her mother expressed deep guilt and fear, referencing a long-buried truth that made Amina's heart pound in her chest. Amina's pregnancy had not been an accident. It was part of a generational cycle. The letter hinted at something far darker, suggesting that the affair and the subsequent cover-up had set off a chain of events that led to Amina's own pregnancy. It seemed that her pregnancy wasn't just a result of youthful carelessness. It was tied to the scandal, to a curse of silence and shame that had passed from one generation to the next. The documents in the box confirmed what the letters hinted at. There were legal agreements made between her parents and the family of the other woman. They detailed how the affair was to be handled, how the other child would be kept a secret, and how their family would go on pretending nothing had happened. Everything had been planned and executed to keep the scandal hidden. But in the process, they had locked themselves into a pattern of deceit. Amina sat there, her hands trembling as the weight of what she'd uncovered sank in. The truth was far more horrifying than she had ever imagined. Her family had lied to her, not just about her father's past, but about the circumstances of her own life. The secrecy surrounding her pregnancy wasn't just about protecting her. It was about covering up their own shame and mistakes. The carefully constructed walls of their perfect family had been built on a foundation of lies. Her mind raced as she tried to process the enormity of what she'd discovered. Her parents had known all along. They had known why her pregnancy had happened and how it was connected to the past. But rather than telling her the truth, they had chosen to keep her in the dark, allowing her to live in confusion and fear. They had been so focused on protecting their own reputation that they had sacrificed Amina's right to know the truth about her own life. The betrayal cut deep. Every strange look, every hushed conversation, every awkward family gathering now made sense. Her parents' distance, their refusal to talk openly about her pregnancy, and the tension between relatives, it all stemmed from this dark secret. The other child, the hidden scandal, and the web of lies that had been spun to protect their image had come at a terrible cost. Amina's heart ached as she thought about the family she had trusted all her life. How could they have done this to her? How could they have let her suffer through her pregnancy, knowing the truth but refusing to tell her? The people who were supposed to love her most had betrayed her in the most profound way imaginable. And yet, even in her shock and anger, Amina realized something else. The past was repeating itself. The cycle of lies and betrayal had come full circle, and now it was her turn to decide whether she would break it or continue the deception. The discovery left her with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear: nothing in her life would ever be the same. As she sat in the dim light of the attic, holding the crumbling letters in her hands, Amina knew that the truth had finally come to light. But what would she do with it? Could she ever forgive her family for the lies they had built around her? And most importantly, how would she protect her child from the same cycle of secrets and shame? The answers would not come easily, but Amina knew one thing for sure. The dark family secret had been revealed, and there was no turning back. Amina's world spun as the weight of what she had discovered pressed down on her. The lies, the deception, and the hidden truths she'd uncovered felt like a noose tightening around her chest. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her family, her mother, her father, every single person she had relied on had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. There was no denying it now. They had known all along. And yet, through her pregnancy, through every painful, lonely moment, they had maintained their facade of support and love. But why? Why go to such lengths to hide the truth? Fueled by a storm of anger and hurt, Amina decided she couldn't stay silent anymore. She had to confront them. She had to know the full extent of their betrayal. That evening, with her heart racing and her hands trembling, she stood in the living room, clutching the stack of old letters and documents she'd found. Her parents, sitting at the kitchen table, looked up in surprise. Her mother's face, usually composed and calm, registered concern as she saw the expression on Amina's face. "What is it, Amina?" Her father asked cautiously, his eyes flickering from her face to the papers in her hands. Amina felt her throat tighten, a mixture of rage and sadness threatening to choke her. "I found these," she said slowly, voice shaking. "And I want the truth, now. No more lies, no more half-truths. I deserve to know what really happened." Her mother's face went pale, and her father stiffened. The silence that followed felt like a physical force, pressing down on the room, suffocating them all. Finally, her mother spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Amina, please. We were only trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Amina snapped, throwing the letters onto the table. "You call this protection? Hiding the truth about my own life, about our family's past? How is that protecting me? Tell me everything, right now." Her father rubbed his hands over his face, looking as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. "You don't understand. There's so much more to it." "Then make me understand," Amina shouted, tears of anger stinging her eyes. "Why did you lie to me? Why did you keep all of this a secret?" There was a long, agonizing pause. Then, with a heavy sigh, her mother finally broke. "Because your pregnancy wasn't just an accident," she confessed quietly, her voice trembling. "It was." She stopped, looking at Amina with an expression so full of pain that it made Amina's heart ache. "It was planned." Amina felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "Planned? What do you mean planned? Who would do that to me?" Her father looked away, staring blankly at the wall. "It was your uncle." The room seemed to close in on Amina, her breath coming in short gasps. "Uncle? Which uncle?" Her mother's gaze shifted, almost imperceptibly, towards a family photo hanging on the wall. The realization hit Amina like a punch to the gut. It was Uncle Kamal, her father's younger brother, a man who had always been like a second father to her. He had been there through everything, always supportive, always protective. He had comforted her during the toughest moments of her pregnancy, when she felt utterly alone. No, that can't be true," Amina whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "Uncle Kamal? He would never. He was the only one who—" But her father interrupted, his voice flat and emotionless. "He orchestrated everything. He knew about the affair, Amina. He was the one who helped us cover it up all those years ago. And when you started growing up, he became obsessed. He saw you as a way to right the wrongs of the past." Amina felt like she was going to be sick. "Right the wrongs?" she repeated incredulously. "What are you talking about?" Her mother's face crumpled as she reached out for Amina's hand, but Amina recoiled. "After the affair, Kamal, he was the one who swore he would keep the family's reputation intact. He's the one who convinced us to hide the truth from you. But then, when he found out you were growing up, becoming a young woman, he started getting strange ideas." "Strange ideas?" Amina's voice broke. "Are you saying he set me up? That he—" She couldn't finish the sentence, the thought too horrifying to say out loud. Her father's face hardened. "Kamal manipulated the entire situation. He arranged for you to be in vulnerable situations, making sure you would get pregnant. He saw it as a twisted way of uniting the family again, through you. He believed it would erase the mistakes of the past, that by controlling your life, he could fix what went wrong back then." The words were like knives, cutting through Amina's soul. Everything suddenly made sense. The strange looks, the tense family gatherings, the way Kamal always seemed to be lurking in the background, offering his support. He had been pulling the strings all along, orchestrating her pain for some sick idea of redemption. "And you let him do it," Amina whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You knew what he was doing, and you let it happen." Her mother broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "We didn't know. Not at first, when we realized it was too late. You were already pregnant, and he convinced us to stay silent, to let it be. He said it was better for the family." "Better for the family?" Amina spat, her voice dripping with disgust. "What about me? What about my life? You sacrificed me to keep your precious reputation intact." Her father bowed his head in shame. "We were wrong, Amina. We were so wrong, but we were trapped. He threatened to expose everything if we didn't go along with it." The truth was like a tidal wave crashing over Amina. Her uncle, the man she had trusted, who had held her baby and offered her comfort, had destroyed her life. And her parents, the people who should have protected her, had stood by and let it happen. The betrayal was too deep, too overwhelming. She couldn't look at them, couldn't bear to be in the same room. "I can't believe this," she whispered, stepping back. "I trusted you, and you let him ruin my life." "Amina, please," her mother begged, reaching out for her. "We were only trying to—" "Don't," Amina choked out. "Don't touch me. Don't come near me. I never want to see you again." With that, she turned and ran out of the house, her heart shattered into a million pieces. She didn't know where she was going or what she was going to do next. All she knew was that the family she thought she knew was gone, replaced by a nightmare of lies and manipulation. And the man who had orchestrated it all was still out there. After the confrontation with her parents, Amina felt like her world had shattered. The revelation of her uncle Kamal's manipulation was more than she could handle. But as she tried to piece together the fragments of her broken life, she realized that the deception went far deeper than she initially thought. What she had uncovered was only the tip of the iceberg, a single thread in a web of lies that stretched back generations. Determined to find out the full extent of her family's dark history, Amina began digging. Late one night, unable to sleep, she returned to the attic where she had found the letters and documents. This time she searched deeper, rummaging through old boxes, family photo albums, and forgotten records. What she found left her stunned. Among the stacks of old papers were faded birth certificates and cryptic letters written in the same hand as the ones she had found earlier. But these were different. They dated back decades, long before Amina was born. One letter in particular caught her attention. It was from her grandmother to her father, written when he was just a teenager. The words chilled Amina to the bone. "No one can ever know the truth about what happened. Our family has survived because we protect each other and we keep our secrets buried. You must promise to uphold this tradition. Our reputation depends on it." The more Amina read, the more it became clear. Her family had a long history of covering up scandals, and her uncle's manipulation was only the latest in a series of dark and disturbing events. The documents revealed a legacy of hidden affairs, illegitimate children, and deceit that spanned generations. Her family had mastered the art of presenting a perfect facade to the world while keeping their darkest secrets buried. One of the most shocking discoveries was about her grandfather, a man Amina had always heard about, but never really knew. It turned out that her grandfather had fathered several illegitimate children, some of whom had been quietly sent away to live with distant relatives, their existence barely acknowledged by the family. The letters and documents hinted at affairs, illicit relationships, and payments made to keep women silent. Amina was horrified to realize that many of her so-called cousins were, in fact, the children of these hidden relationships. It wasn't just her grandfather. Amina's great-grandparents had been involved in their own scandal, a love triangle that ended in tragedy, with one family member being exiled from the community after an affair was exposed. The letters hinted at bribery and cover-ups, as the family did whatever it took to maintain their reputation in the eyes of the public. The pattern was clear. For generations, her family had been obsessed with appearances, willing to go to any lengths to preserve their good name, even at the cost of their own integrity. As Amina uncovered more of her family's past, she realized that her uncle Kamal's actions were part of this twisted tradition. He hadn't acted in isolation. He had grown up in a family where secrets were currency, where reputation mattered more than truth, and where manipulation and control were seen as necessary tools to keep the family intact. One of the most gut-wrenching discoveries was about her own mother. Amina found letters exchanged between her mother and an old friend, written during her teenage years. These letters revealed that Amina's mother had also suffered from the family's obsession with keeping up appearances. When Amina's mother was a young woman, she had fallen in love with someone her parents disapproved of, a man from a different social class, someone they deemed unworthy of their family's status. The letters told the story of how her grandparents had forced Amina's mother to break off the relationship, threatening to disown her if she didn't comply. It was through these letters that Amina finally understood the full extent of her mother's pain. She hadn't just been complicit in Kamal's schemes. She had been a victim of the same toxic family culture that prioritized control over love. Her mother had been manipulated just as Amina had been. forced to make choices that tore her apart inside, all in the name of preserving the family's reputation. The more Amina uncovered, the more her trust in everyone around her crumbled. Nothing was as it seemed. Her family, who had always portrayed themselves as pillars of the community, respectable, honorable, and upstanding, had built their legacy on lies. The people she thought she knew, the people she had relied on for love and guidance, had been involved in covering up terrible secrets time and time again. The knowledge that her family's history was filled with deceit made Amina feel isolated and lost. How could she ever trust anyone again? How could she believe in love, in family, in loyalty, when the very people who had raised her were capable of such betrayal? What stung the most was that her pregnancy, the most personal and painful event of her life, was part of this pattern. She had been used, just another pawn in her family's never-ending quest to protect their name. The manipulation went deeper than she had ever imagined. The realization that her family had been repeating the same mistakes for generations was a crushing blow. They had sacrificed real connections, real emotions, and the well-being of their children to maintain an image, to uphold a legacy built on lies. Amina knew that her pregnancy wasn't just the result of one man's twisted plan. It was the culmination of years of deceit and manipulation. Amina felt a wave of emotions wash over her: anger, sadness, and betrayal, but also clarity. The truth had finally been revealed. Her family's dark history was no longer hidden in the shadows. And now Amina had a choice. Would she continue the cycle of silence and lies, or would she be the one to break it? For the first time, Amina realized that the power to change her future and the future of her child was in her hands. She couldn't change the past, but she could refuse to let it define her. The weight of her family's dark history pressed down on Amina, but it also gave her strength. She was no longer the confused, frightened girl grappling with her unexpected pregnancy. She now understood the web of lies that had been spun around her, and she was determined to unravel it, no matter the cost. The showdown was inevitable. She had to confront the people who had deceived her and destroyed her trust. Amina could no longer live with the half-truths and whispered secrets. Her family's image, the one they had fought so hard to protect, was about to be torn apart, and she was ready to be the one to tear it down. It was a hot, tense afternoon when Amina called her parents, Uncle Kamal, and several key family members to the house. The gathering was under the pretense of a family meeting, but everyone knew something bigger was brewing. The air in the room was thick with anxiety as they all sat around the living room, their faces lined with concern. No one knew exactly what Amina was about to say, but they could sense the storm that was coming. She stood in front of them, the letters and documents clutched tightly in her hand. Her heart raced, but her voice remained steady. This was the moment she'd been building toward for weeks. It was time to expose the truth. "I know everything," Amina began, her voice cutting through the thick silence. "I know about the lies. I know about the secrets this family has been hiding for generations, and I know what you've done to me." Her words sent shockwaves through the room. Her mother's face went pale, her father's eyes dropped to the floor, and Kamal shifted uncomfortably in his seat. For a long, agonizing moment, no one spoke. Amina turned to her uncle, the man she had once trusted more than anyone. "You," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and betrayal. "You manipulated me. You used me to clean up the mess this family made years ago, and you let me believe it was all my fault. How could you?" Kamal's eyes flashed with surprise, but then a hint of defiance crept into his expression. "Amina," he started, trying to regain control, "you don't understand the full story." "Don't you dare tell me I don't understand," Amina shouted, cutting him off. "I've spent weeks reading these letters, uncovering every lie you've told. You knew about the affair, you knew how much damage it caused, and instead of dealing with it like a human being, you dragged me into it. You've been pulling the strings behind my back, and you made sure I was the one who paid the price for this family's mistakes." Her father shifted uncomfortably, his face a mixture of shame and guilt. "Amina, we thought we were protecting you," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Protecting me?" Amina's eyes burned with fury. "You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourselves. You were protecting your precious reputation. You let him manipulate me, and when I got pregnant, you did nothing to stop it. You didn't even tell me the truth." Her mother, who had been silently crying, finally spoke up, her voice cracking. "We didn't know how to fix it. Kamal convinced us that it was better to stay silent, that it was the only way to keep the family together. We were scared, Amina. We thought if you knew the truth, it would destroy everything." "It already has," Amina said coldly, her voice steady. "Everything I thought I knew about this family is a lie. You kept secrets. You hid the truth, and you sacrificed me to keep your perfect little image intact." Kamal, who had been quiet up until this point, suddenly stood up. "This isn't just about you, Amina," he snapped, his calm demeanor cracking. "You think you're the only one who's suffered? This family has been falling apart for years, and I've been the one holding it together. Do you think you're the first one to face a scandal like this? Do you know how many times I've had to clean up after your father's mistakes, after your grandfather's mistakes?" Amina's jaw clenched. "So, what? You thought that manipulating me into a pregnancy would somehow fix everything? You thought that using me to cover up your lies would heal this family?" Kamal's face hardened. "You don't understand how this works. In families like ours, reputation is everything. Without it, we're nothing. I did what I had to do to protect all of us." "Protect us?" Amina spat, her voice rising in fury. "You destroyed us. You destroyed me." Her words hung in the air, raw and devastating. The rest of the family sat frozen, watching the confrontation unfold with wide eyes, too stunned to speak. The tension in the room was unbearable. "You manipulated me," Amina continued, her voice shaking with emotion. "You used me. And the worst part is, you didn't care about how much it would hurt me. You were too focused on covering up the past to even see the damage you were causing in the present." Kamal's anger flared, but it was her father who finally stepped in, his voice hoarse with emotion. "He's right about one thing, Amina. We were scared. We've always been scared. Scared of losing everything we've built. But you're right, too. We've been wrong. So wrong." He looked at her with deep regret in his eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive us, but please know that we thought we were doing the best we could. We didn't realize how much we were hurting you." Amina's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She was beyond forgiveness. "I don't care about your excuses anymore. I don't care about the past. What I care about is what happens now." Her father nodded slowly, broken by the weight of his guilt. "We'll tell the truth," he said softly, his voice cracking. "The whole truth." For the first time, Amina saw real remorse in his eyes. Her mother, too, seemed shattered, silently weeping as the reality of their choices came crashing down. Even Kamal, once so confident in his control, looked shaken. The family's carefully constructed image had finally crumbled, and there was no way to put it back together. But the truth wasn't fully out yet. "There's more," Amina said, her voice hardening again. "This isn't just about me. This family has been hiding secrets for generations. The affairs, the illegitimate children, the cover-ups. I've found the letters. I know everything." The room went silent again, and the faces around her went pale. She saw the shock in their eyes, the fear that their darkest secrets were about to be exposed. "You've been living a lie for years," Amina continued. "And now, it's all coming out. No more lies, no more secrets. This family doesn't get to hide behind a fake reputation anymore." As Amina spoke, she realized that the truth had finally come to light. Not just her truth, but the truth of her entire family's history of deceit. The once perfect image of her family had been shattered, and the only thing left was the cold, hard reality of their betrayal. The question remained, could they survive the fallout, or would the family finally fall apart for good? Amina didn't know the answer yet. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back now. The truth was out, and the lies could no longer protect them. In the days following the explosive confrontation, Amina's world felt quieter, but the silence was heavy. The secrets had been exposed, the lies shattered, and the family she had known all her life now seemed like strangers. The once unbreakable bond between her and her parents felt fragile, like something that had been irreparably cracked. Her uncle Kamal, the man she had once trusted and loved, was a ghost in her life. Someone she could no longer even bear to think about without feeling a mix of anger and sorrow. As Amina sat in her room, staring at the photographs on her wall, She thought about the family she had once idealized. The childhood memories that had once brought her comfort now felt tainted, overshadowed by the revelation of betrayal. The weight of the decision ahead of her loomed large. Could she forgive her family? Could she move forward with them, or was it time to sever ties for good? On one hand, she was exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained from uncovering the family's dark secrets. The idea of cutting them out of her life, of walking away from the toxicity that had engulfed her for so long, was tempting. She could start over, rebuild her life on her own terms, free from the burden of her family's lies. But then there was the other side. No matter what they had done, these were the people who had raised her. Her parents, despite their deception, had been there for her throughout her childhood. And while they had allowed her uncle to manipulate the situation, they had also shown remorse. They had been trapped by the same cycle of secrecy and shame that had ensnared generations of their family. Could she find it in her heart to forgive them? Amina turned her attention to her child, now sleeping peacefully in a crib nearby. As she watched her baby, she knew that whatever decision she made would affect not just her, but her child as well. Her child deserved a better future. A future free from the lies and betrayals that had defined her own life. She couldn't allow the toxic patterns of the past to continue into the next generation. The next few days were spent in quiet reflection. Amina distanced herself from her family, taking time to process everything she had learned. She confided in a close friend, someone outside the family, who could offer her a fresh perspective. "You need to do what's best for you," her friend advised. "But don't let their mistakes define the rest of your life. You have the power to choose how you move forward." Amina's mind returned again and again to the choice in front of her: forgiveness or separation. Forgiving them didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean excusing what they had done. But it could mean freeing herself from the anger that had consumed her since the moment she uncovered the truth. Forgiveness could allow her to rebuild a relationship with her parents, one that was based on honesty rather than lies. But forgiveness wasn't easy. It meant accepting that her family would never be perfect, that they were flawed and had made terrible choices. And it meant figuring out where to draw the line with her uncle Kamal. Could she ever allow him back into her life? The answer to that was clear. No. Her uncle's manipulation had crossed a line that could never be repaired. Amina knew that she would never speak to him again, never let him anywhere near her child. That part of her life, his role in her family, was over. When she finally sat down with her parents, the air between them was thick with unspoken pain. Her father, eyes downcast, was the first to speak. "Amina, I know we can't undo what's been done, but I want you to know, I am sorry. We should have told you the truth from the beginning. We failed you." Her mother's voice was soft, but it trembled with emotion. "We never meant to hurt you. We thought we were doing what was best for you, but we were wrong. I hope you can find it in your heart to give us another chance." Amina looked at them, her heart heavy with the weight of their words. She had imagined this moment so many times, what she would say, how she would react. But now that it was happening, the anger she had expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, she felt a deep, aching sadness. Her parents were just as broken by their decisions as she was. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you," Amina said quietly, her voice calm but firm. "What you did, it hurt me more than I can explain. But I understand now that you were trapped, too. This family, for generations, has been built on secrets. I don't want that for my child. I won't allow it." Her parents nodded, tears welling up in her mother's eyes. "We'll do whatever it takes to make this right, Amina," her mother whispered. Amina took a deep breath. "I need time. I don't know what our relationship will look like moving forward, but I need to set boundaries. I need to focus on myself and my baby. And I need to know that this pattern of secrecy ends here. No more lies." Her father wiped his eyes and nodded. No more lies. The decision to forgive, or at least to begin the process of forgiving, wasn't easy. It didn't happen all at once. In the weeks that followed, Amina kept her distance, allowing herself the space to heal. She started therapy, finding ways to cope with the deep sense of betrayal and to rebuild her own sense of self. Slowly, she began to feel stronger, more in control of her life. She didn't allow her uncle Kamal back into her life. His actions had been too calculated, too damaging, and she couldn't risk him being a part of her child's future. Cutting him out was her first step toward protecting herself and her child. As time passed, Amina re-established a cautious relationship with her parents. She visited them occasionally, but the dynamics had changed. It was clear that the past would never be forgotten, but they were determined to rebuild on new terms. Terms that Amina set for herself. Trust would take time, and it would have to be earned. In her own way, Amina found a path forward. She dedicated herself to raising her child with love, transparency, and honesty. Everything that had been missing from her own upbringing. The future wasn't perfect, but it was hers to shape, free from the shadows of the past. The cycle of lies that had defined her family for generations had finally been broken. Amina's story is one of survival, betrayal, and the unrelenting courage it takes to face the truth. Even when that truth is buried beneath layers of deception. She uncovered secrets that had been hidden for generations, and in doing so, she found the strength to reclaim her life and protect her child from the same cycle of lies. But her journey doesn't end here. The wounds left by her family's betrayal run deep, and only time will tell if those bonds can ever be fully restored. Now the question remains, can family ties once shattered by such dark secrets ever truly heal? Could you find it in your heart to forgive, or would you walk away for good? What would you do if you discovered a secret this devastating? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories that challenge the meaning of family, trust, and survival. Subscribe and hit the bell to stay updated with more jaw-dropping stories like this. And don't forget to leave a comment. What would you have done in Amina's shoes?